All right, for the uninitiated, Brittney Sykes, first-time All-Star, was traded to the Seattle Storm in exchange for Alicia Clark, Zaya Cook, who has since been waived, and a Seattle first-round pick. And from what I gather, it is Seattle's own pick that they traded, right?
Yeah, which is really significant. The initial press release that they sent out just said a Storm 2026 first-round pick, which they have 3 of them, the extra 2 coming from the Los Angeles Sparks and Las Vegas Aces. You know, the Aces and Storm are neck and neck in the standings. Presumably, if you're making this trade to Seattle, you presume it's going to bump you back a bit in the standings. That Sparks pick in particular, even though I think they have a pretty good shot at making the playoffs now, it does have considerable upside since they are currently in the lottery.
Well, yeah, and then also like the other thing with the WNBA lottery is that it takes into account the prior 2 seasons. So even if LA does make the playoffs, and Washington, of course, is now going to start a losing streak of its own, presumably, I don't see that pick getting worse than being in the top 4. I do see it potentially being a top 3 pick. And then with that, you still, you get your odds at potentially getting the number 1 or the number 2 pick. So that is the crown jewel. That is the pick that, you don't really give up under almost any circumstances unless you think that you are going to get like some star rookie franchise cornerstone back that's on a cost-controlled contract. And as far as I know, none of those players seem to be available right now. So, but it is going to be interesting kind of to see what Seattle does going forward, right? Like, I'm curious, before we get into this trade, do you see them making any other potential moves? Do you see them continuing to be active?
Well, one of the interesting pieces of this is they didn't trade Katie Lou Samuelson, who is out for the year with an ACL injury. And we actually ironically saw this with her sister Carly the other day when she was sent by Minnesota as part of the matching salary in their deal for Dejanay Carrington. And Dallas plans to waive her since she's out for the season. And as we'll surely get into talking about this trade deadline, basically everyone in the WNBA who's a veteran is going to be an unrestricted free agent this offseason because of the coming new collective bargaining agreement and the massive salary increases we're likely to see. There's 2 veterans in the entire league who are signed to veteran contracts beyond this season. So everyone else, if you're out for the season, because there's not bird rights in the same sense that we see in the NBA and the W, you basically have the same chance of re-signing that player next offseason, whether you're on their roster or not. So the Storm could still do something with that Katie Lou Samuelson money between now and the deadline, but I wouldn't say that I'm expecting them to do that at this point.
Well, yeah, the other one of the contracts that goes into 2026 is actually Seattle Storm wing Lexi Brown, and that's interesting too as far as Seattle's potential future moves. Like, they could opt to keep her, but also to be able to have any player, on the cap that we currently exist in versus what's about to happen is going to be valuable for any team, especially somebody like Lexi Brown, who hasn't played a lot of minutes for the Seattle team. She's kind of been in and out of the rotation, but is, presumably somebody who can come off the bench and hit some threes for you, is a veteran player, could definitely have some value for, a lot of different teams. So definitely something to watch. All right, let's talk about the actual trade in and of itself, because I find it just Seattle's overall positioning in the trade, like in the trade market, to be very interesting. Just trying to get a sense of where they think that they're at. They are the number 6 seed. They are 2-4 in their last 6 games. And, there were, but at the same time, it's like you look at some of those losses and you look at that incredible Friday night Sparks double overtime loss. You look at that Sunday game against the Fever that you were actually at. And maybe they think, because of how close those games were, well, we're just a move away potentially, right? Like they are sort of like straddling those 2 timelines. Are you going to say something?
Yeah, it was an emotional roller coaster, I would say, because there was parts of the game on Sunday where you're thinking to yourself, well, if the Storm aren't really that competitive at home against Indiana without Caitlin Clark, like, are they one move away from winning a playoff series, being in the top 4? Maybe not. And then fourth quarter, they go on a run led by Dominique Malunga, the number 2 pick, who just continues to improve over the course of the season. Somebody we talked about a lot the last time I was on this podcast, right after Olivia Miles decided not to declare for the WNBA draft, and
could still potentially end up in Seattle.
Very, very much could, yeah, with those 2 extra picks that we discussed. But if Malinga keeps improving like we have seen in the last couple of weeks here, she does kind of give them that upside. And the other interesting element of this is we have such a bottleneck in the WNBA standings, really after the Minnesota Lynx now, because the New York Liberty have struggled since Breanna Stewart went down. As a result, we've got I think it's 3.5 games separating second through 9th, I believe, in the league, and the Storm right in the middle of that. Had they beaten Indiana on Sunday, they would have, moved even in the season series, been tied in the standings. Instead, they're a game back and can tie the season series at best. But, that's kind of the thin margins we're talking about right now. And yeah, losing a game against the Sparks on Friday, where Skylar Diggins misses at the buzzer, a game on Sunday where they had 5 3-pointers in the final minute 7 that could have tied the game, none of which went down. Like, Brittney Sykes could be the difference between turning those close losses into wins going forward.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the 3-pointers, and I think, this kind of gets to what I think is the situation that Seattle's in. They, before this move, to me, were not a team that could make one move and be on the cusp of a title. Like, this move absolutely makes them better. Brittney Sykes gives them a lot more rim pressure. She gives them scoring punch. She gives them depth. I'm curious to see if she comes off the bench or if she ends up starting for Erica Wheeler. Either option kind of, has its own enticements. She is setting free throw records this season and is joining a team that is the worst free throw shooting team in the WNBA. So, and she also bolsters her perimeter defense to a degree that is like, I don't even know what you do now that you have, if you're an opposing team, that you have to deal with Skylar Diggins, Gabby Williams, and Brittney Sykes at the same time. And then, if you make it past them, you've got to deal with Ezzy Magmavor and Nneka Ogwumike. So they were already tight defensively. They were about to get a lot better. It gives them a little bit more lineup versatility, especially with their perimeter players. I think that's something that they needed. So, and I also think the price, we got to talk about the price. Like, the price was really good to be able to give up your worst first rounder, Alicia Clark, a player who's fallen out of the rotation. And presumably, seems like she wanted to have a bigger role than the one that she ended up having in Seattle. And then Zaya Koch, a player that they ended up waiving. To get an all-star back for that's just like on paper in a vacuum, the type of move that you make just like 9 out of 10 times, right? At the same time, I also actually, before we get it, I'm curious if you feel like this is a little bit of a market setter too. Like, given that just about everybody is a free agent this season, do you think that's part of the reason that they were able to get Brittney Sykes for a late first round pick? And do you think that's going to kind of set the market for other players, like potentially, an Ariel Atkins or, Maisha Hines-Allen?
Without question. Yeah. I mean, I think that, we've seen this over the years. Like, if you're trading for basically only the rest of this season, that this player is primarily a rental, someone who you could potentially re-sign in free agency, but there's no guarantees. And again, no real advantage to the incumbent team, the way that the WNBA model works right now, that is going to lessen the value considerably, as opposed to if you're, thinking about getting this player for the next 2 or 3 seasons. And, I think the one interesting thing is, I think probably to Seattle's advantage to a degree is that there wasn't a lot of other teams out there that could make a deal like this. The combination of the extra picks and then the fact that, Alicia Clark had the $185,000 salary according to her Hoop Stats salary database that we utilize in the WNBA, facilitated this deal in a way that other teams that might have been looking to add a player, it's tougher for them to fit that salary in. That's a complication that we see with the WNBA's hard salary cap. So 2 of the teams that had the flexibility to make a move as contenders were Minnesota, which went out and made the move for DeJounte Carrington, and now the Storm with Brittney Sykes. And that does sort of signal to me that I probably would be a little bit surprised if we saw Marina Mabry get traded, if we saw Ariel Atkins get traded. You mentioned, of course, in your story, Arike Ogunbowale is someone to watch. That there's been some reporting that Dallas did not shop her and does not intend to trade her since then. But I think it was going to be hard to find a market for some of those players, just with the difficulty of making a deal under the WNBA's hard salary cap.
Well, the interesting thing is that you bring up Marina Mabry, who is a player, given the contracts we talked about with Seattle, the fact that they still do have more draft assets, is a player who could actually end up making sense for the Seattle team. She's been linked to them all season long just as somebody who is a shooter on a team that requires more shooting. And that's kind of one thing I'm curious about moving forward with Seattle is how their outside shooters can like kind of where things go. Like, you know, you have Skylar Diggins who's shooting 40% on the season. After that, it gets kind of shaky. Gabby Williams came out of the gate just on fire this season, but she's shooting 21% from three in her last 20 games. Erica Wheeler, you know, you can rely on her to hit 1 of 3, but she's kind of, you know, she's definitely come down to earth from where she was at the start of the season. Nneka can space the floor, but she's a low volume shooter, which I think is part of the reason we might see Erica Wheeler actually continue to start because they're going to need to have that spacing. But I just feel like this trade, it doesn't solve the shooting issue, and it doesn't solve what I feel like is a sneaky. I actually want to ask you about this. Do you feel like it kind of helps with the rebounding issue, which I feel like is one of the sneaky problems that Seattle has had all season? We kind of saw it rear its head in the Fever game, but a lot of those rebounds were actually off of longer shots. So do you think having a more active perimeter player who can like provide some size is actually going to be the thing that solves the issue for Seattle rebounding wise? Because they have an interesting situation where they have a bit of a front court logjam where they have Dominique Malonga, who is just continues to justify getting more and more minutes. They obviously have Nneka. They have Ezzy, who's been playing a lot better as of late. So those are kind of, you know, your players. But at the same time, for some reason, they have not been a strong rebounding team. How do you bridge that gap if you're Seattle?
Yeah, it's a tough one because the real issue is like, how do you solve it without creating other issues?
Exactly.
You know,
yeah.
Because there are ways you could upgrade the rebounding, and you know, Noelle Quinn has been highlighting the importance of their perimeter players contributing on the glass. She cited a conversation with Skylar Diggins before. Diggins had a triple double last week in Connecticut, the first of her career, and the second in Storm franchise history. Also had one in the All-Star game, Skylar Diggins, this year. So there has been a bit of a renewed focus on the glass from her. But, you know, Skylar Diggins has so much on her plate. I don't think you want her to, you know, really be focused on that. And I agree. It's not a move that is really going to help them in that regard or in terms of their shooting. I do think we talked about Lexi Brown a little bit earlier. She went through a stretch at the start of the season, you know, coming back from missing a lot of last year, her battle with Crohn's disease, and much of the season before, and just couldn't make a shot the first couple months of the season, even in practice. You know, her accuracy was not at the level we've come to expect over a long period of time. In the last, you know, since the All-Star break, we've started to see Lexi make more shots, and she's someone I would expect continues to be in the rotation, even, you know, adding Brittney Sykes here to that perimeter mix because of the fact that you need that shooting element. And, you know, I think part of their thinking was, you know, when they signed Alicia Clark last offseason, brought her back to the organization where she won 2 of her 3 championships, you were thinking she was going to be part of that shooting upgrade. Shot 37% last year for Vegas, obviously was a terrific 3-and-D role player for those Storm title teams. And she also went through an extended slump, 3 of 16 from 3 in the month of July. And that's where her minutes started to drop down. And, you know, she fell all the way out of the rotation on Friday night, her first DNP CD since her rookie season.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does kind of speak to, like, Seattle did know that was a problem that they needed to solve. I'm curious where are you at on them after this trade? Do you feel like they have moved, like, where were you at on them before? Did you feel like they were a pretender or contender? Like, do you feel like they've moved the needle enough?
I mean, here's the thing is your opinion about the teams 3 through at least 6, probably 7 in the WNBA standings, it changes based on the day. I was struck by this last week watching WNBA Countdown before the Lynx Liberty game, and they were talking about pretender or contender doing this exact segment. And Carolyn Peck cited that Phoenix was inconsistent. I was thinking, well, everyone in Seattle is upset about how inconsistent the team is in terms of, you know, going and winning at New York and then losing at Connecticut the next game. You know, those sorts of things, how much they've played up and down to their competition. Atlanta had the enormous loss to recently has lost to lottery teams. So who's the team who is consistent out of this group? Lately, it's been Indiana, who's riding that 5-game winning streak without Caitlin Clark. And, you know, that's very exciting about their chances of emerging from this pack of teams. But I don't think there's any team, you know, that consistently feels good about where they are in the standings in that position, because it changes from night to night.
That's what makes this deadline so interesting. I feel like every team is kind of in a position to, you know, kind of go like red team, black team and be like, hey, okay, well, these are our chances to make a really deep run, and these are the reasons that we won't. And you can kind of convince yourself of whatever. If you're an optimist about things, like let's say we're optimistic about Seattle, we say, okay, well, everybody finds their shooting range again as he continues to kind of make progress on the offensive end, the way in ways where she was like definitely struggling earlier in this season. We see better play from Lexi Brown, Brittney Sykes fits like a glove. Nobody can guard them. And maybe they get a playoff run where they don't have to deal with some of the heavy rebounding teams, because I do think that, Minnesota potentially running into them, like that's a buzzsaw. They're pretty much built defensively to be able to stop a team like Minnesota in a way that I don't think any other team in the league is. And that's one team that also can't really punish them on the boards the way that a healthy Liberty, a healthy Atlanta, a healthy Indiana Fever team could.